It's going to be wonderful. So during lockdown, what we just did on a Thursday, was it a Thursday morning or a Thursday afternoon on Zoom, we did testimonies. And those that were involved and did them and watched them, they were absolutely amazing. I think we can make films about people's lives in this church, yeah. And I was so blessed. And it really is a testimony, is a story about how Jesus works in people's lives in a real way. And you can't argue with a testimony. You cannot argue with it. So over each month, we're just going to have a testimony about what Jesus does in people's life. And this week, we've got Lin, yeah, who's... Lin's a real blessing to us, she is, yeah. But Lin, I'm going to start. Here we go. Are you ready? I think so. Oh, you're not ready, are you? Tell you what, you can borrow mine, Lin. Is that all right? We'll chuck that one away. There you go.
1, 2, yeah.
So Lin Parr, yes. Yeah, this is your life. We should get a red book, shouldn't we?
Scary.
So Lin, okay. What was your life like before you met Jesus?
Before I met Jesus? Well, very, very different. So I grew up in a home where I was sent to church for Sunday school, but Mum and Dad didn't come. Maybe they wanted a Sunday morning to themselves. So I grew up knowing Bible stories. That was it, Bible stories. I could tell you about the miracles and that sort of thing. But when I got to be 12 and I had the choice whether I wanted to go or not, I stopped going. So nothing really stuck with me. And Andy, I met Andy through high school, so we've known each other since we were 11. We were in the same class at high school. I know, we go back a long way. And we started going out together from 16. Sweet 16.
You poor thing. 11, Lin. 11. Andy Parr's been in your life since 11.
3 life sentences I've had. But anyway. So I didn't have any experience of God in my life, although I think, if I'm honest, there were times when I thought about God and I thought about death, and I was scared. I must admit, I was scared. But it didn't make me sort of go out looking for God at all. I didn't. So we married, and we had, when our second child was born, do you want me to go on to this? Yeah. When our second child was born, which was in March 1976, I went to a baby clinic with him, like you did in those days, to get him weighed and all of that. His name was Daniel, by the way. And at the baby clinic, there was lots of other mums there and babies, and I kind of sat next to this lady called Janice, and she just started chatting to me. Now, I was very shy in those days. You may not believe it, but I was very shy, and I found it difficult to just talk to people I didn't know. And she started talking to me, and she was really nice. And she invited me to her house for coffee, and it kind of went on from there. And then one day, at the time, Andy was trying to get a job teaching. So he'd done his PGCE at college after university, and he tried to get a job, and he just couldn't, and he couldn't get an interview even. And he'd applied to St Thomas's High School in Lancaster to be a science teacher. And I was moaning to Janice because he hadn't even got called for an interview. We don't go to church, so he didn't get an interview. Well, that was Janice's way in. That was it. The door was open. And she just said, well, we go to church. I must have looked at her like this. What? Because I didn't know anybody, particularly young people, that went to church. I just didn't know any. So that was a real surprise to me. And she's just started telling me her story about how her and her husband Tom had become Christians about 12 months before. They were only new Christians. And she started telling me how her life had changed when she became a Christian. And I thought, well, I thought I was a Christian because I lived in the UK. Surely if you're a Christian and you live in the UK, you live in the UK, surely that makes you a Christian. And if you've been baptised as a baby, that makes you a Christian. And she was telling me something totally different. And over the week, she'd tell me a little bit more, and she'd tell me her experience of God. And she'd tell me about miracles that had happened to them and how her marriage had been blessed because of it. And I started to have lots of questions about all of this. And in the end, she said to me, Lynn, she said, I know you've got lots of questions, but she said the best person to answer them is God. So she said, I'm going to give you a New Testament. And I want you to go away and I want you to read for yourself all about God and God's plan and the gospel. So that's what I did. So she didn't give me the whole Bible. She gave me just the New Testament. And I started reading at Matthew. And I thought, well, this is actually quite easy to read. Because before, as a child, I tried to read from Genesis and got stuck, after a few days. But started reading, and the more I read, the more, hang on, this is starting to make sense. And the things that she was telling me about Jesus, suddenly, that started to make sense. And I read in John chapter 3 and verse 16, this is probably a verse that most people know anyway, if you're Christian anyway. For God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him will not die but have everlasting life. And I sort of read that and thought about it more and more. And I thought, so God loved me and he sent his son to die for me. And this was the bit that I had never heard at Sunday school. They never shared that. Yeah, I knew all the parable of the sower, and I knew all the parables and the miracles, but I didn't know about Jesus. And I was reading a lot. And I think I must have been sharing with Andy, although I don't remember doing it. I must have done. And then one night, I'm coming into my life after becoming a Christian. This was the lead up to it. But we'd had many conversations with Tom and Janice, and they even brought the minister to our house one evening to see us, to chat through. And he was talking to both of us. We were both really interested and really seeking, I suppose. There was a desire in me because I saw something in my friend Janice and her husband, and it was attractive. It wasn't scary, it was attractive. And I thought, I want this. I want to know this God. And I remember that night, Mr. Frank Mitchell, the minister from the church, saying to both of us, particularly to Andy, he felt it was more for him, but it was for me as well. Wouldn't it be great if you came to know Jesus tonight? And I can remember saying, but that requires faith, doesn't it? Yeah. Well, where can I go and get some faith? Show me where I can go so I can get some faith, and that'll be fine. I'll go and I'll get some. Because to me, it was like a big wall. And I was this side, and they were that side, and God was that side. And it was like, how can I get the other side of that? And they just said, it's faith. You've just got to believe. Anyway, they went home. Andy went up to bed, and I just could not rest. And in the end, I got down on my knees in the living room on my own, and I prayed, and I'd never really prayed before. And I said, Lord, I don't know if you're there, but I'm going to believe that you are. I'm going to believe. I'm making a decision now that I believe that you are there. I believe that I've done things wrong, that have offended you, offended other people. I believe that Jesus died in my place and bought my forgiveness, and that his blood has cleansed me. I'm going to believe that it's for me. And I want you, Lord, to come into my life as you've come into Tom and Janice's, and I want it to be different. I want it to be real. And nothing happened. So I went up to bed. Well, I've done that. I've done it. I went up to bed. And sorry, do you want to interject? Okay.
So what happened?
Sorry. This is a long story. So I got up the next morning. Of course, I've got 2 small children to look after, so I was busy. Andy got up and went off to work. And bear in mind, I prayed that prayer the night before. But to me, nothing had happened. I prayed it, but I was just the same. I was washing up at the sink, and this always is like in Technicolor for me, glorious Technicolor. I was washing up, and I looked out into my garden, okay? And I wasn't a fantastic gardener in those days. It was just a bit of lawn and a few plants. But, you know, I looked out there, and it was like I could see a creator's hand in everything. The birds, the trees, the flowers. Even the fact that I could see. Suddenly was a miracle. I could see and I can hear. And I thought, this is weird. But it was just, I thought, yeah, something's happened. I'm not the same. I'm looking outside and I can see there is a God. There is a God. There is a creator God. And he's made this world and he's made it beautifully. And he loves me. And that was I had this wonderful assurance that he loved me. So I'd actually moved from behind that wall to the other side of it. And then I worried all day, what was I going to say to Andrew when he came home from work? What am I going to say to him? He'll think I'm nuts. He'll think I'm nuts. Came home, we had tea, got the kids to bed. Then he said, Lynn, I've got to tell you something. I said, well, I've got to tell you something as well. So I told him what I'd done and my experience. I said, and I believe I'm a Christian now. He said, well, at lunchtime I got on my knees in the men's toilet. I asked Jesus into my life. I'm a Christian. Well, it just blew me away because we both had that same experience of God at this, almost within hours, 12 hours of each other. It was amazing. So I'm so thankful because whatever we've experienced of God, we've experienced it together. We've been able to support each other because there's been a lot of things happened since then and incredible things, and our lives just, we kind of changed direction. We were going in that direction. All of a sudden, we were going in that direction. And we would go, all of our ideas, our thoughts, our hopes, our dreams, our ambitions, they all changed. They weren't the same anymore because God was there and God was real. And it all of a sudden became important that we knew what God wanted for us because we realised God had a plan for us, for our lives. And it wasn't the same as the plan that we thought we had. And so things started to change in our lives. And I don't know where to go from here because there's so much.
Tell us, you've got plenty of time. What did God do in your lives, Lynn?
Okay. Well, I have to be honest, there were ups and downs in this road. I can't honestly say everything was wonderful. I can't, because we faced a lot of opposition from our families who didn't understand. They thought we'd gone religious nuts. And so my parents who believed they were Christians, and we were saying, well, we've become Christians. No, you're already a Christian. So there was a lot of opposition and they didn't understand. and we were going to church every Sunday, twice on a Sunday. So we weren't going there for lunch on Sunday, and the things that we'd always done, a lot of things changed, and we were teaching our children about God and all of that. And then I said our second child, Daniel. So when it was on just a week before Christmas, and he was 2.5. We put him to bed one night, and he didn't wake up the next morning. So the doctors called it bronchial pneumonia, and it was, I suppose, like a cot death, I don't know, but it was devastating, absolutely devastating. And I'm so thankful that I had my Christian family with me, and John and Sue saw us through a lot of this. We'll always be grateful. By this time, we'd moved to Leyland, and we were helping to plant a church in Leyland. So we'd moved from, we were living in Lancaster, we were now in Leyland. And that was, for us, it was a big thing. It was really, really hard. I can't say, yes, it was easy, because it wasn't. It really wasn't. But I knew every day, and we've sung these this morning, I knew every day that God was with me. I knew in my weakness he was my strength. I knew that he was there for me every day. And yes, our church family gathered around us, and they were wonderful. But we still had to go through it, and my arms that were full of a 2.5-year-old were empty. So Lisa was our oldest daughter. She just started school, bless her. And Mum started dressing her and doing things for her that Mum didn't do before. But still, there were a lot of hours between Auntie and Lisa going to school and then coming home again. But every day God was good, and he helped me gradually. But I have to be honest, I was starting to experience terrible headaches. And the doctor, I kept going to the doctor, can you give me something for these headaches? And he'd just say, go home and relax. I am not tense. He said, go home and relax. And it was tension, and it was anxiety, and I didn't understand really what was happening. And we were at a ladies' meeting at our friend Kat's house, and all the ladies were there, and I'm there with my head on my shoulder, my chin like this. And I remember one of the ladies, it might have been Joan, saying to me, are you all right, Lynn? Yeah, I'm okay. Well, I've got this really bad headache. It's really bad around here. Would you like us to pray for you? And I said, well, I'd never experienced prayer for anything before, not personal like that. So I said, oh, anything. So I sent for our minister, Ken, and he brought a little bottle of oil. Again, this was all new to me, I never experienced this before. And he came, and he said, right, Lynn, I'm just going to put a little bit of this oil on your head here. I'm going to pray for God to heal you. Okay, anything. So he did that. And then he started praying, and the people, all the lovely ladies, they all put their hands on me, and they started praying. And they started praying that God would do some healing work. And he started to say, for God has not given you a spirit of fear, but he has given you a spirit of a whole mind. Sorry, the words have gone. But he has given you a sound mind. You are no longer to be in fear. And then he said, one of the ladies said, and God's going to give you your heart's desire. Oh, my heart's desire is for a child. And it hadn't been happening. It hadn't happened. Every night I'd gone to bed and I'd slept with my arm around Andy. I had to get up at least once a night, if not twice, to go into Lisa's room to check that she was still breathing. I had to. I could not do that. From that night onwards, I can honestly say I never did that again. It was like the fear had gone. God had broken that fear. He'd seen that there was fear binding me up. The headaches went after a few days. By the end of the month, I was pregnant with our third child, Laura. She was our wonderful gift from God. Okay.
So, you are saved by the grace of God. And faith we've talked about, but for the good things and plans that God has for us. I 100% know that God, at that point in your story, had good plans
Amen.
for you. What were some of those good plans? What did you get up to?
Oh gosh, where did we get up to from then? So we were in the middle of helping to plant a church through Free Methodism. We were being saved through a Free Methodist church. So we were part of a wonderful team of people, and we planted a church in Leyland, and we were all very, very heavily involved in it. And then Andy started to do this Bible study. Through doing this Bible study, started to feel that God was wanting him to pray for people abroad, particularly Asia and Southeast Asia. And then he wrote off all these letters to China and Japan. Got this letter back from somebody in Japan inviting him to pray. So he started praying for the work in Japan. And then God started saying to him, okay, Andy, well, you're praying for people to go to Japan. What about you? Why can't you go? So Andy being Andy shared it with me, and I said, you're joking. I am not going to Japan. I am not leaving my mum and dad. I'm not leaving my family. I'm not leaving this house, which I love. I'm not leaving this church that we love and we're very involved. That can't be God's will. It can't be. I didn't believe it was God's will. So I just kind of threw it out. And every so often he'd bring it up again. I said, no, it's not. This went on for 2 years, bless him. He prayed about this for 2 years. Prayed for me for 2 years. And then he had an accident at school, didn't you? His shoulder got dislocated. I was very, very pregnant at the time with Laura, and he was ill with this shoulder. It was all strapped up, and I was having to care for him. And we were praying, please, Lord, don't let this baby come until he's in a position where he's not strapped. Anyway, then it got to, Laura was born in the October, and then it got to just before Christmas, didn't it? Yeah, 1980. And he said to me one day, he said, Lynn, he said, I've been praying and I've been reading, and he said, I believe God wants us to make a decision on Japan. I really believe it's what God wants for us. So what did I do? I took myself to bed. So when God speaks to me, that's what I do. I kind of, he puts me on my back. So I came down with some weird, mysterious virus. And I went to bed, and for 3 days I wrestled with God like Jacob did. I wrestled, and all I can say is that all my thoughts were revolving around why I believe we couldn't go. Lots of things, the church, the children, the money, the finances, where we'd live, what we'd do. And every time verses it's like God kept dropping these verses in my thinking about the finances and how we'd look after us, and about the family and who should come first, and the verses that I'd sort of knew, and they were there. It was like I must have been stupid really, because all this time all these verses are coming and I'm still not recognising that it's God. I'm still fighting with Andy. It took nearly 3 days for me to realise I was actually fighting with God. It's weird. It was like this conversation was going on. And it got to the middle of the night, the third night, and it was like I'd reached a point, I was really exhausted with it, because I couldn't, he just kept bringing me food and leaving it, you know, and going. He didn't engage because he knew I was struggling. And in the middle of the night, I'd reached the end of all these things, all these reasons. And the last thing I could think of to say to God was, you couldn't use me. I'd be useless as a missionary. I really wouldn't. I wouldn't have the faith. I wouldn't be strong enough. I wouldn't be able to do it. You couldn't use me, possibly. And this verse came to me, and I've written it down because it was the one that turned everything around, and it was 2 Corinthians 12, chapter 12, verse 9. My grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in your weakness. It was like a light went on. Hang on. My grace, God's grace, is sufficient for me, so his strength will be made perfect in my weakness. So this is God saying all this. So this is God that wants us to go to Japan. Well, if it's God that wants us to go, of course, I'll have everything I need. Of course. I'd seen enough miracles leading up to that in God's provision of everything. I knew God would look after us. I knew if God wanted us to go, he'd enable us to go in whatever respect, whether it was finances, whether it was gifting, whatever. I knew God would give us. And so I woke Andy up in the middle of the night and I said, wake up, we're going to Japan. And that was it. And that started a series of steps which led us to the mission field in Japan, planting churches in Japan. And we were out there for 12 years, planting churches and sharing our faith and seeing people come to Christ. And there's so many stories. I don't know where to end with this because God brought us back eventually.
He did. So Andy and Lynn, and I think others, were involved in some way of planting this church as well. So because they were faithful, we're sat here today. In some sense, there are so many stories. Just one or two more questions.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. So has it been at times difficult to follow Jesus? Was it felt?
Yes. Well, I will tell you one thing which fits in with that, was that when God told us he wanted us to return to the UK, and this was in 1995, and he was heading up the mission out there, and he'd been in Taiwan for a conference, and he was there for about 5 days, I think, and while he was out there, that's when he believed that God was saying to him he wanted us to come back to the UK. So he came home and he shared it with me. And it was really hard because we got this lovely church and it was growing. And we were seeing people baptised. And we got this wonderful building, which is another story that was a miracle. This wonderful building that God provided. And then God was saying, I want you to leave that behind. I want you to go back to UK. And we prayed about it. And we said, well, Lord, what is there in the UK for? What is there? We've got no home. We've got no church. Well, we were pre-Methodist, but we didn't have our own church. How would we live? What about the kids? There were a lot of questions. We shared it with our church. We shared it with the denomination. They said, if it's money, we'll give you some more money. If you need money for the children, we'll give you. The church was saying, don't go, we need you. It was really hard because they wanted us to stay, but God was saying, I want you to come back. So we came back and we brought everything back, our 2 teenage kids, and we came back. And it was a hard 12 months because there was nothing. We came back, God wonderfully provided a rented house for us. It was a lovely house and we were very near to my parents, and we had a church and we reconnected with friends and that. But still, it was 12 months with nothing. We lived off the savings that God had given us all the time that we were in Japan, and we'd saved and we lived off those. That was God's wonderful provision for us. Then after 12 months, he started the process to bring us back to Leyland, which was another amazing miracle. So Andy was appointed at a church, a Free Methodist church near to Preston, and trying to find somewhere to live. We couldn't find anything there. So a series of steps brought us back to a house in Leyland and onto the same estate where we'd lived before we went. It's like we came back full circle to the same village where we lived when we first came to Leyland. But it wasn't an easy time, that. And even coming into New Frontiers for us was another step of faith. So it required us leaving the security of a denomination and a salary and a home, and trusting God to provide for us, trusting God to provide work for us so that we'd have an income. But God wonderfully had a plan. It was all a plan, and it brought us here, which is wonderful. I can only say that. I love this church. I love these people. I love this family. They mean everything to us.
Has Jesus, this is the last question, always been faithful?
Oh gosh, yes, absolutely. There's been times when we haven't known the answer to some of our questions immediately, but we've always known he was there. We've always known there would be an answer eventually, and we've had to be patient. But he's never, ever failed us. That I honestly can say that quite truthfully. And even at the moment, where it's hard and really struggling with a lot of stuff in my life, but still I know God is faithful. And even the other night when I went to bed, before I went to sleep, I had to put all these things, and it came up this morning, things that have been said. I had to put all these things at the foot of the cross and say, right, Lord, I can't carry these. I'm going to put them there because I know you are faithful. You're going to look after these. I can't cope with all of these bags that I keep picking up. I know my God is faithful, and I know my God will take care of all of these. Yes, absolutely. No doubts.
Amen. I'm going to pray for you, Lynn. Before that, should we just give Lynn a clap? That was amazing. Let me pray. Lynn, I praise God often for you and Andy. Honestly, I really do. Yeah, you're such a blessing. Yeah, and your faith, your example are such a blessing to me. Yeah. So, Father God, we just thank you for Lynn. We thank you that in 1970 something, 77, 76, that you came and found her. And that we thank you for this friend who just talked to her about church, and that she got on her knees and she prayed and she asked, and she just had a revelation of your love and for her. Father, we thank you for all the many, many miracles that you've done in Lynn's life. We thank you for her faithfulness. We thank you for her story. We just thank you for her absolute trust in you. We just